Somewhere beneath the waves right now, there are streets no one has walked in 3,000 years. There are staircases leading nowhere, walls standing in silence, buried in silt, foundations of buildings that once held families, markets, temples, entire lives, now home only to fish and shifting sand. For centuries, sailors told stories about them. Fishermen pulled up strange stones in their nets and said nothing, afraid no one would believe them. And then, in the 20th century, divers went looking, and what they found should not have been there. Cut stone blocks, arranged with precision, sitting on the seafloor in places where no ocean should have reached for thousands of years. Straight edges, right angle, patterns too clean to be an accident of geology. The question that followed has never fully gone away. Who built this, and how did it end up at the bottom of the sea? To understand what lies beneath the waves, you first have to understand something uncomfortable about the ocean itself. It has not always been where it is now. 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, so much of the planet's water was locked into glaciers and ice sheets that sea levels sat more than 100 meters lower than they do today. Land that is now open water was once open ground. Coastlines we would not recognize stretched for miles beyond where beaches now end. Entire landscapes, river valleys, hills, forests, and yes, in some cases, settlements, existed in places the ocean has since swallowed whole. Then the ice melted. Slowly, and then not so slowly, the water rose. It did not happen overnight, but on the scale of human generations, it happened fast enough that the people living through it would have watched the sea creep closer year after year, decade after decade, taking a little more land each time. Some of what disappeared beneath the waves was simply empty coastline, but not all of it, because as it turns out, human beings have always loved the water's edge. We have always built our cities, our ports, our sacred places, as close to the sea as we dared, which means that when the water rose, or when the land beneath our feet sank, or when a single violent night of earthquake and tsunami rewrote a coastline in hours, some of what we built went down with it. Today, we are going to descend into that lost world. We will walk the oldest submerged town ever mapped by archaeologists, a place older than Stonehenge, sitting in shallow water off the coast of Greece. We will explore the drowned pleasure palace of Rome's emperors, where marble floors that once hosted the empire's most powerful people now lie under 6 meters of the Mediterranean. We will examine the most controversial underwater structure on Earth, a formation off the coast of Japan that has divided scientists for 30 years, with one side insisting it is nature's work, and the other insisting human hands carved it. And we will end somewhere that should not exist at all, a city so wealthy, so infamous, that when it finally went under, people said it was God's punishment. This is not a story about lost continents or sunken empires from myth. This is something stranger, and in many ways more unsettling. This is the story of real places, real structures, cut, built, and lived in by real people, and then, one by one, taken by the sea. Some of what we find will be clearly explained by archaeology, and some of it, even now, remains genuinely disputed. We will walk through both, and by the end, you can decide for yourself what you believe was standing on the seafloor before the water ever arrived. Off the southern coast of Greece, in the shallow glass-clear waters near Laconia, there is a town that predates the Trojan War. You could swim over it without ever knowing it was there. From the surface, the sea looks empty. Turquoise water over pale sand, the kind of view found on 1,000 Mediterranean postcards. but drop just 3 or 4 meters down, and the outline of a lost civilization begins to resolve beneath you. Streets, rows of buildings, foundation walls still standing at knee height, courtyards, what appears to be a religious building, larger and more carefully constructed than the rest, tombs cut into the earth, undisturbed for millennia because no one on land ever knew they were there to disturb. This is Pavlopetri, and when archaeologists finally mapped it in full using sonar and diving surveys in the early 2000s, they realized they were looking at something remarkable. The oldest known submerged town in the world, dating back roughly 5,000 years, with the town in its final form flourishing around 1600 BC, centuries before the events described in Homer's Iliad. Picture it as it once was. A working Bronze Age port town, its narrow streets busy with foot traffic, its harbor filled with small trading vessels moving goods along the coast, pottery workshops, storage buildings for oil and grain. A community organized with genuine urban planning, streets that run in orderly lines, buildings grouped with intention, not the chaotic sprawl of a random settlement, but something designed. The people who lived here were part of the wider Mycenaean world, the same civilization that would later be remembered and mythologized in the stories of Agamemnon and the war at Troy. But long before any of that, Pavlopetri was simply a place where people lived ordinary lives. Fishermen mending nets in the morning light, traders haggling over amphorae of oil, children running through streets that thousands of years later, fish would swim through instead. So what happened to it? The most likely answer is not fire or invasion or catastrophe in a single dramatic night. It's something slower and in some ways stranger. The ground beneath the town sank. This stretch of Greece sits in a seismically active region, and over centuries, gradual tectonic subsidence combined with the broader rise in sea levels after the Ice Age pulled the coastline down and let the Mediterranean creep in. There was likely no single day when the people of Pavlopetri watched their town vanish beneath the waves. It would have been slower than that. A well that used to be fresh turning brackish. A storage room flooding during high tide that never used to flood. A gradual, uneasy realization that the water was winning and that eventually they would need to leave. And they did leave. The town was abandoned long before it was fully submerged, its final residents relocating to higher ground, carrying with them whatever they could, and leaving the rest to the sea. What makes Pavlopetri extraordinary is not mystery. Its origins and its fate are reasonably well understood by archaeologists. What makes it extraordinary is preservation. An entire Bronze Age town plan, streets and all, sitting almost perfectly intact beneath a few meters of clear Mediterranean water, untouched by the modern construction that has erased so many equivalent sites on land. It is, in a very real sense, a snapshot, a 3,000-year-old photograph of ordinary daily life, frozen the moment the sea decided to take it. But Pavlopetri is only the beginning, because the next site we're diving into wasn't lost to slow subsidence or the passage of centuries. It was lost to power, indulgence, and one of the most violent, unstable stretches of coastline on Earth. If Pavlopetri was a town of fishermen and farmers, Baiae was something else entirely. In the final centuries of the Roman Republic and through the height of the Empire, Baiae, on the coast of the Bay of Naples in Italy, was the place where Rome's elite came to misbehave. The Roman writer Seneca, a man not exactly known for prudishness by ancient standards, called it a vortex of luxury and a place to be avoided by anyone who wanted to keep their reputation intact. That should tell you everything you need to know about what went on there. Emperors built palaces along its coastline. Julius Caesar had a villa here. So did Nero. So did Caligula. Men whose names have become shorthand for excess and cruelty, and who chose this stretch of coast as their personal escape from the pressures of Rome. The bathhouses of Baiae were legendary, elaborate complexes of heated pools, marble floors, and mosaic ceilings, built not just for hygiene, but for spectacle. Wealthy Romans came to Baiae to drink, to scheme, to conduct affairs far from the prying eyes of the capital, and to display wealth in ways that would have been considered vulgar anywhere else. It was, in the truest sense, an ancient resort town for the ultra-powerful, a place built entirely around pleasure, status, and indulgence, which, in a strange way, makes what happened to it feel almost poetic, because Baiae sits directly on top of one of the most geologically restless regions in the world. The Campi Flegrei, the burning fields, is a vast volcanic caldera stretching beneath the Bay of Naples, the same volcanic system connected to nearby Mount Vesuvius, which would go on to bury Pompeii in AD 79. The ground beneath this entire region rises and falls over time due to volcanic activity underneath, a process called bradyseism. Sometimes the land rises, sometimes it sinks. And over the centuries following Baiae's golden age, it sank. Slowly, the coastline dropped. Structures that once sat comfortably above the waterline found themselves closer and closer to the sea until eventually large portions of the town simply slipped beneath it. Today, much of ancient Baiae lies underwater, close enough to shore that it has become one of the only places on Earth where you can snorkel directly over the remains of a Roman resort town. Divers swim past sunken villa floors, mosaic pavements, faded but still visible beneath the shifting light of the water above. Statues, some replicas placed by archaeologists, others genuine ancient remains, standing in silence where marble hallways used to echo with laughter, gossip, and the particular kind of decadence that only unlimited power and unlimited wealth can produce. There is something almost unsettling about it. A place built specifically to escape consequence, to exist outside the normal rules that governed Roman life, ultimately swallowed by the one force that no amount of wealth or status could negotiate with, the restless ground itself. The Bay of Naples never stopped moving. It didn't care whose villa was in the way, and Baiae is a warning of sorts, though not the kind carved on a monument. It's a reminder that the coastline is never as permanent as it looks, that the ground people were dancing on, drinking on, plotting political murders on, was never as solid as they assumed, which brings us to a site far more contested than either of the two we've just explored, one where archaeologists still cannot agree on the most basic question of all: was it built by people at all? In 1986, a local dive tour operator off the coast of Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, noticed something strange on the seafloor while scouting for hammerhead sharks. Stepped terraces, sharp right angles, flat platforms stacked like a staircase, descending into the depths. What he found looked unmistakably like architecture. A stone structure with straight edges and geometric precision, sitting roughly 25 meters below the surface. Word spread. Divers came, then researchers came, and by the 1990s, the Yonaguni Monument had become one of the most talked about and most fiercely disputed underwater discoveries in the world. Let's describe what's actually down there, because the structure itself is genuinely striking regardless of which side of the debate you land on. It is a massive formation of stone, roughly the size of a large building, with flat terraces, sharp angular steps, and what appear to be distinct, deliberate edges cut into the rock. Some divers have described what looks like a channel or moat around part of the structure. Others point to features that resemble carved steps, a formation some have called a stage, and markings that, to the untrained eye, look far too clean to be the product of random natural erosion. Here is where the story splits into two entirely different accounts. One side, led for decades by marine geologist Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus, argues that the Yonaguni Monument is at least partially man-made, the remnant of a structure carved by human hands thousands of years ago, potentially predating the last ice age's end, when sea levels were low enough that this location would have been dry land. Kimura has pointed to what he describes as carved steps, a possible quarry nearby with similarly shaped stone, and features he believes are simply too geometrically consistent to be coincident. In his view, this could be evidence of a lost prehistoric structure, possibly connected to nearby land at a time when the sea had not yet reclaimed it. The other side, and it's important to say this is the position held by the majority of mainstream geologists who have examined the site, argues that Yonaguni is entirely natural. The rock in this region is a type of sandstone that has a well-documented tendency to fracture along flat, straight plains thanks to its layered sedimentary structure and natural jointing patterns. Geologists like Robert Schoch, who has dived the site himself, have pointed out that similar terraced angular rock formations exist on dry land nearby on Yonaguni Island itself, formations that were unquestionably shaped by natural erosion, with no dispute about human involvement at all. If the same geology produces similar shapes above water, the argument goes there's no reason to assume something different happened below it. So, who's right? Here's the honest answer. This is not a case where we can simply tell you the mystery has been solved. It hasn't. Decades of diving, surveying, and academic argument later, Yonaguni remains one of the few genuinely open questions in underwater archaeology. A structure sitting in plain sight, fully explored, fully documented, and still capable of producing completely opposite conclusions from equally qualified experts staring at the exact same stone. What we can say is this: the geology of the region does produce naturally angular formations elsewhere on dry land, which weakens the case for a purely artificial structure. But the sheer scale, the consistency of the angles, and certain specific features divers have documented continue to make some researchers uneasy about writing it off entirely as coincidence. Maybe it's simply a spectacular quirk of geology, the ocean's own sculpture, made without a single human hand involved. Or maybe, somewhere beneath the surface off a small Japanese island, there is a fragment of something built by people whose names, language, and entire civilization vanished long before recorded history began. Nobody currently alive can tell you for certain which one is true. And there's something genuinely thrilling about that. In an age when almost everything feels mapped, measured, and explained, Yonaguni remains one of the last places on Earth where the answer is still, we don't fully know. Off the western coast of India, near the modern city of Dwarka in Gujarat, marine archaeologists diving in the Arabian Sea have found something that connects directly to one of Hinduism's oldest and most beloved stories. According to ancient Hindu texts, including sections of the Mahabharata, Dwarka was the legendary city of Krishna, a magnificent capital built on the coastline, said to have sunk beneath the ocean shortly after Krishna's death, consumed by the sea, as though the world itself was closing a chapter of divine history. For centuries, this was treated the way most people treat ancient flood myths, as sacred story, not literal geography. Then, starting in the 1980s and continuing through subsequent decades, marine archaeologists working with India's National Institute of Oceanography began surveying the coastal waters near Dwarka and found something that made the myth considerably harder to dismiss: submerged structures, stone walls, anchors, pottery, remains of what appears to be a substantial coastal settlement sitting in shallow water just offshore from the modern town, a real physical site with genuine archaeological material, dating to a period that, depending on interpretation, could align with the late Harappan period of the broader Indus Valley civilization. This is important to be precise about. The underwater findings near Dwarka do not prove the literal mythological account of Krishna's city. Archaeology cannot confirm gods, and no serious researcher claims otherwise. What the findings do show is that this stretch of coastline was, in fact, home to a genuine ancient settlement that was submerged by rising seas and shifting coastlines, evidence of a real port town lost to the water, in a region that ancient storytellers had, for thousands of years, associated with a city swallowed by the ocean. In other words, the myth may not be literal history, but it may be memory, a folk memory, distorted and reshaped over dozens of generations of oral storytelling of something that genuinely happened, a coastal settlement, real and lived in, that the sea genuinely did take. A similar story plays out slightly further north in the Gulf of Khambhat, where sonar surveys in the early 2000s detected geometric-looking formations on the seabed at a depth suggesting they could be very old indeed, old enough to predate the well-established chronology of Indian civilization if the formations turned out to be artificial. Some early reports pulled up wood fragments and pottery-like material during dredging, sparking headlines about a potentially vast lost city, far older than anything previously known in South Asia. It's important to say clearly, this particular claim remains far more contested and far less confirmed than the material found near Dwarka itself. Many archaeologists have raised serious questions about the initial survey methods, the interpretation of sonar data, and whether the structures are geological formations rather than architecture. Unlike Pavlo Petri or Baiae, there is no broad scientific consensus here. This is a case where a sensational early claim outpaced the evidence needed to support it. What we're left with is a genuinely fascinating pattern, even accounting for that uncertainty. Across cultures, on opposite sides of the world, ancient peoples told stories about cities the sea swallowed whole. And in at least some of those cases, like the confirmed site near Dwarka, there really was something down there, which raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with for a moment. How many other flood myths, dismissed for centuries as pure fiction, might also be folk memory of something real? Not every drowned city needs a myth to make it compelling. Some are simply remembered because the disaster that took them was recorded in horrifying detail while it was happening. On the night of January 16, 1362, a massive storm surge tore across the North Sea coastline of what is now northern Germany and the Netherlands. Later generations would call it the Grote Mandrenke, the Great Drowning of Men, one of the deadliest storm events in recorded European history. Along that low-lying, heavily populated coastline sat Rungholt, a prosperous trading town built on reclaimed marshland, protected, or so its residents believed, by a network of dikes holding back the sea. The dikes were not enough. Contemporary accounts describe a storm of almost unimaginable violence, wind and tide combining into a wall of water that simply overwhelmed the coastal defenses. Entire settlements were erased in a single night. Estimates of the death toll across the region range into the tens of thousands, though for a specific town like Rungholt, exact numbers were never recorded. Only the fact that, after that night, the town simply stopped appearing in historical records. For centuries afterward, Rungholt became something close to legend in German folklore, the Atlantis of the North Sea, a cautionary tale about a wealthy, perhaps arrogant town punished for its excess. Local stories, embellished over generations, described a place so rich and so morally corrupt that its destruction felt almost deserved. Church bells said to still ring beneath the waves on quiet nights, a ghostly reminder of judgment delivered. The historical reality, as usual, is less about divine punishment and more about the simple, brutal mathematics of geography. This entire stretch of coastline sits below sea level, protected only by human-built earthworks that, in the medieval period, were nowhere near sophisticated enough to withstand a storm of that magnitude. For a long time, Rungholt's exact location remained genuinely unknown, its precise site erased, along with everything else that night. But archaeological surveys conducted along the Wadden Sea mudflats, using magnetic and geophysical mapping during periods of low tide, have gradually revealed traces believed to belong to Rungholt and the surrounding settlements. Post holes, remnants of dike systems, drainage ditches, and foundation traces consistent with a substantial medieval trading community now buried beneath sediment in the tidal flats. Twice a day, the tide over this area pulls back far enough to expose mudflats where, according to researchers, the remains of Rungholt and its surrounding villages lie just beneath the surface, waiting to be walked across by anyone willing to make the trek at exactly the right moment. There's something quietly devastating about that image, not a city dramatically frozen underwater like Baiae, with mosaics still visible through clear seawater. Just mud, just silence. A trading town that once had merchants and churches and the ordinary noise of medieval commercial life, now reduced to a scatter of post holes that only appear twice a day, only to disappear again as the North Sea reclaims what it took 600 years ago. Rungholt is a reminder that not every lost city needs mystery or grandeur to be haunting. Sometimes the sea simply takes what it wants on an ordinary night without warning and leaves almost nothing behind to mark that anyone was ever there at all. If Rungholt's story carries an undertone of moral judgment, our next site wears it as an open badge. By the late 17th century, Port Royal, Jamaica had earned a reputation as one of the wealthiest and most notoriously debauched port cities in the world. Built by English colonists and fueled by a booming trade in sugar and, notoriously, by privateers and pirates who used the port as a base and a marketplace to spend their plunder, Port Royal became infamous. Contemporaries called it the wickedest city on earth, a place packed with taverns, brothels, and a population that, per capita, may have had more disposable wealth flowing through it than almost anywhere else in the Americas at the time. On June 7, 1692, a massive earthquake struck the region. The ground beneath much of Port Royal was built on unstable sandy landfill extending out into Kingston Harbor. And when the earthquake hit, that unstable ground did something catastrophic. It liquefied. The sand essentially turned into a fluid, and large sections of the city simply slid into the harbor, buildings and all, sinking in a matter of minutes. Contemporary accounts describe scenes of horror. people swallowed by fissures that opened in the street and then closed again, crushing them. Church towers toppling directly onto fleeing crowds. The harbor itself surging in a tsunami that finished off structures the earthquake hadn't already claimed. Roughly 2,000 people are estimated to have died in the earthquake and its immediate aftermath, with disease afterward claiming thousands more in the following weeks. Given the city's reputation, it's not surprising that many at the time, and for generations afterward, interpreted the disaster as a moral verdict. Sermons across the English-speaking world cited Port Royal's destruction as proof of divine punishment for a city that had, in the popular imagination, given itself over entirely to sin. What actually sits beneath the harbor today, though, is not myth. It is one of the most significant underwater archaeological sites in the Western Hemisphere, sometimes referred to by archaeologists as the Pompeii of the New World, because of how much of the sunken city survived intact, preserved by the mud and sand that swallowed it in an instant, rather than eroding it slowly over centuries. Divers and archaeologists working the site have recovered an extraordinary volume of material. Intact buildings still standing on the harbor floor, a pocket watch famously stopped at the exact time of the earthquake, ceramics, glassware, personal items belonging to people who had no idea that morning would be their last. Because the destruction happened so fast, the city dropping beneath the water in a matter of minutes rather than being slowly abandoned or eroded, everyday objects were essentially flash-frozen in place, offering archaeologists an almost unprecedented window into ordinary 17th century colonial life. Unlike Yonaguni's ambiguity or Rungholt's near-total erasure, Port Royal offers something rare: a fully documented historical event, a precise date, eyewitness accounts, and a physical underwater site that matches the historical record with startling accuracy. It's a reminder that some drowned cities aren't mysteries at all. We know exactly what happened, exactly when, and in some cases, almost exactly who was affected. And somehow, that clarity doesn't make it any less haunting. If anything, it makes it worse, because there's no ambiguity to soften the fact that an entire thriving city, full of people going about an ordinary Tuesday morning, was gone within minutes. Our final stop takes us back over 2,000 years to a city so completely lost that for most of modern history, historians weren't even certain it had existed at all, despite it being mentioned by name in ancient Greek texts, including references connected to Herodotus. Thonis-Heracleion was once one of Egypt's most important port cities, sitting near the mouth of the Nile, serving as the primary gateway through which Mediterranean trade entered Egypt for centuries before the founding of Alexandria eclipsed it. It was said to be where Helen of Troy and Paris landed, according to Greek legend, and it was almost certainly a genuine functioning hub of commerce, religion, and administration, home to temples dedicated to Amun-Gareb, grand harbor infrastructure, and a population that connected Egypt to the wider Greek and Mediterranean world. And then, for well over 1,000 years, it simply disappeared from history. Not metaphorically, literally. No one could locate it. Ancient references to the city existed in texts, but for centuries, archaeologists debated whether Thonis-Heracleion had been a real distinct location at all, or whether ancient writers had simply been describing Alexandria itself under a different name. The answer came in the year 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio, after years of systematic sonar surveying in Aboukir Bay off the coast of Egypt, located the remains of an entire submerged city roughly 6 kilometers off the modern coastline, buried under several meters of silt and seawater. What his team found was staggering in scale: massive temple ruins, colossal statues, some over 5 meters tall, depicting Egyptian pharaohs and gods, still recognizable after more than 1,000 years underwater. 64 ancient shipwrecks, remarkably preserved in the low-oxygen mud of the bay, gold jewelry, bronze coins, ritual objects, stone tablets bearing inscriptions that, in some cases, allowed archaeologists to definitively confirm the city's identity, including one dual-language decree that named the city as both Thonis and Heracleion, finally settling the century-old scholarly debate about whether these were two cities or one. So how did an entire major city vanish so completely that its exact existence was in question for 1,000 years? The most likely answer, based on the geological and archaeological evidence gathered at the site, is a slow-motion combination of factors rather than a single dramatic catastrophe. The ground beneath Thonis-Heracleion was built on a foundation of unstable clay and sand, sediment deposited by the Nile itself over centuries. That ground gradually compacted and subsided under the weight of the city's own monumental construction. Combine that slow sinking with rising sea levels and periodic earthquakes and tsunamis known to have struck this coastline, and you get a city that likely didn't vanish in one single night, but rather sank by stages over centuries, its final remnants disappearing beneath the Mediterranean sometime around the 8th century AD. Piece by piece, the city that once welcomed traders, sailors, and pilgrims from across the ancient world slipped beneath the waves, until eventually there was no trace left on any map, and no living memory left to mark exactly where it had been. It took 2,000 years, sonar technology, and one obsessively persistent French archaeologist to bring it back. Walking through Gaudio's photographs and footage of the site today, colossal stone pharaohs lying on their sides in the silt, temple columns half buried in sediment, the ghostly outlines of wooden ships that once carried real cargo for real merchants. It is almost impossible not to feel the scale of what was lost. Not a myth, not a disputed rock formation. An entire functioning ancient city, one of the most important ports in the ancient Mediterranean world, erased so thoroughly that human beings simply forgot it had ever existed, until the sea eventually gave it back. We began this journey by asking a simple question: who built the structures beneath the sea? By now, you've seen that the honest answer depends entirely on which stretch of sea floor you're standing over. Some of it is unambiguous. Pavlo Petri, a genuine Bronze Age town slowly claimed by sinking ground and rising water. Baiae, an emperor's playground swallowed by the same restless volcanic earth that would later destroy Pompeii. Port Royal, a wealthy, notorious port city liquefied in minutes by an earthquake so violent that people at the time genuinely believed it was divine judgment. Rungholt, erased in a single catastrophic storm and now visible only twice a day, when the tide pulls back just far enough to remember it existed. Thonis-Heracleion, an entire major Egyptian city so thoroughly lost to history that scholars debated whether it had ever existed at all, until sonar and persistence finally proved it had, and some of it remains genuinely, stubbornly unresolved. Yonaguni still divides serious researchers, decades after it was first discovered, with no consensus in sight. The deeper claims around the Gulf of Kambhat remain contested, a reminder that not every dramatic headline survives careful scrutiny. Even Dwarka, where real archaeology confirms a real submerged settlement, still leaves open the more haunting question of how much of the old story was myth and how much was memory. What connects every single one of these places, mystery or not, is the same underlying truth. The coastline is not permanent. It never has been. The ground people built their entire lives on, their temples, their palaces, their taverns, their homes, has always been more fragile, more temporary than it felt while they were standing on it. And yet, despite earthquakes, floods, sinking ground, and forgotten centuries, these places did not entirely disappear. They waited, silent, buried, patient, for someone with a boat, a sonar rig, and enough curiosity to go looking. History, it turns out, doesn't always burn or crumble into dust. Sometimes it simply sinks, and it waits there in the dark and the quiet until someone finally comes looking for it. If you enjoyed this journey beneath the waves, consider subscribing. There are more lost worlds like this one waiting to be uncovered. And in the comments, tell us, which lost city or ancient mystery should we dive into next?